The story of Buddhist art is the story of the development of philosophic ideas and a vision of life. From the 1st century onwards, deities were created in Indian art for meditation and adoration, puja. The belief was in the oneness of all of creation. The separated forms of the world were maya, or illusions. The truth was beyond all forms. However, the deities provided familiar shapes which were easier for the mind to grasp. By the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, very sophisticated forms of images of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were being created in the subcontinent. Buddhist art of the Krishna Valley and the subsequent depictions of the northern plains between the 4th and 6th centuries focused upon the inner life of man. By the 5th century, sublime deities were made in central and northern India. Though they were in human form, their purpose was to move us through their grace and beauty, to transcend the world of forms, to leave behind our attachments and desires. Around the 2nd century BC, at the magnificent site of Ajanta, great Buddhist caves had been carved out of the heart of the mountain. In the mid-5th century, under the rule of the Brahmanical Vakataka kings, the site saw renewed activity. As in the Indic tradition seen earlier, feudatories, ministers and even queens freely followed the Buddhist faith and patronized Buddhist caves and art. There were no religious divisions, and the patrons of the Buddhist caves sometimes proclaimed their descent from Brahmanical deities. The facades of early Chaitya Grihas presented a grand simplicity. The second phase of Ajanta brings us a changed world. Cave 19 of the mid-5th century is the first Chaitya Griha or hall of meditation of the Vakataka period. The facade of the hall is thickly populated with divine forms. The horseshoe-shaped window above the entrance, based upon wooden architectural models, has become more elaborate. On either side of the window are made attendant figures. They stand in graceful postures, and the treatment is delicate. Buddhas are made flanking the entrance to the cave. The figures have a humanity and sensitivity which gives Ajanta a special place in Indian art. There is a grace and an inward look which is the hallmark of the sculpture of this period. The garments are diaphanous. A Nagaraja and a Nagini with an attendant figure are among the finest sculptures of Ajanta. These are serpents made in human form, and such images come from the earliest times in Indian art. They have that rapt concentration and inward look which catches us immediately and takes us to a place of peace deep within. Earlier, the interior of the hall of meditation was simple and unadorned. The focus was on the final truth, which was formless. Now it is the beauty of form which serves to reveal the grace which underlies creation. Peace is now created by beauty and harmony around us. Though the stupa continues to be made, it is very considerably elaborated. Now the Buddha is made in the front of the stupa to bestow his blessings upon the worshipper. Cave 26 is a grand Chaitya Griha, perhaps the last excavation at Ajanta. It is much larger and more elaborate than Cave 19. The Buddha inside is made within a stupa and sits with pendant legs upon a throne. The Maitreya Buddha, who is as yet to come in the world, is often made in this fashion. The circumambulatory path around the shrine is elaborately carved. On the left wall of the cave is a marvelous depiction of the Buddha's victory over the armies of Mara. These forces represent the turbulence and confusion of the mind. Mara's daughters below represent our desires that keep us bound to a life of pain in the material world. The Buddha is serene as he rises above these and is ready for enlightenment. A profoundly moving scene is that of the Mahaparinirvana of the Buddha, when he finally achieves release from the mortal world. This is one of the grandest yet most sensitive depictions in all of Buddhist art. The figure of the reclining Buddha is about 22 feet long and is best seen from near his feet, the appropriate position for the devotee. The perspective has been perfectly made for viewing from this spot. Ananda, his grieving disciple, also sits at his feet, desolate at the loss, forlorn. In the solemnity and grandeur of the noble achievement of the Mahaparinirvana, Ananda adds a human touch which is unforgettable. The same sentiment is echoed in some of the seated figures of the monks below the Buddha. Above, heavenly musicians celebrate the great moment of the Buddha's release from the world of illusions. A number of grand viharas for the residence of monks were excavated in this period. These are considerably larger than the earlier viharas and are profusely painted. In fact, practically every inch of wall and ceiling space was originally covered with fine paintings. Early literature has many references to such halls of murals, and these at Ajanta are extremely valuable as they are the only surviving significant body of early paintings. These exquisite murals are also amongst the greatest treasures of the entire heritage of Indian art. The growing complexity of iconography is seen in the caves of Ajanta of this period. Besides the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas in the upper floor of Cave 6, the shrine also has 6 Manushi Buddhas who preceded Gautama Buddha. While the hammer and chisel sounded in the gorge of Ajanta, work was also taken up again at the site of Kanheri, within present-day Mumbai. In the late 5th and the 6th centuries, a number of older caves were modified and new excavations were made. Kanheri became the largest rock-cut cave site in India, with over 100 caves. On either side of the veranda of the early Cave 3 were made colossal Buddhas over 22 feet high. This is the beginning of the tradition of Brihad, or colossal Buddhas, which spread near and far. They display the gesture of the bestowing of grace. Vidyadharas bring garlands to them. By the 4th century, the method of yoga or yoga tantra was established in Indic thought. It was a graded path of evolution through discipline and meditation. In the art of the Buddhist faith, Cave 90 of the early 6th century has the earliest surviving mandala, which presents such a graded path. The Buddha at the center represents the final or universal truth. The Buddhas and other figures around him are the personifications of wisdom and compassion, which lead us to the ultimate knowledge at the center. In Cave 41 of the late 5th or early 6th century is the first known depiction of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara with 11 heads. At Kondivite, today in the suburbs of Mumbai, is a group of caves made around the 2nd century AD. In the 5th and 6th centuries, new excavations were made here, and Buddha figures were carved in the walls of the earlier caves. At Aurangabad, not far from Ajanta, another group of caves was excavated in the 6th century. The earlier caves here are contemporaneous with Ajanta and seem to continue the sculptural traditions of that site. There are very fine carvings seen on the pillars of Cave 3. In the later caves here, sculptural panels are increasingly used to carry the iconographic message. A litany of Avalokiteshvara and panels of other bodhisattvas are made at the entrance to the circumambulatory passage of the shrine. Further inside, to the left of the entrance to the shrine itself, is made a panel of Tara with attendants. These are early depictions of the increasing number of deities which were being created in the Yogacharya development of Mahayana Buddhism. On the left wall of the shrine is made a dancer with 6 musicians. This is one of the finest sculptural depictions in the caves of this period. The site of Ellora, on the outskirts of the city of Aurangabad, witnessed the grand culmination of more than 1,000 years of the rock-cutting tradition. From the 6th century AD till the 10th, the last caves to be made for the Buddhist, Brahmanical and Jaina faiths were created here. 35 caves were cut out of the western face of an outcrop of the Sahyadri hills. The caves of 3 faiths were made in overlapping periods, and, as everywhere in ancient India, these demonstrate the generous attitude of the rulers towards the worship of all divinities. As in the case of other sites, the caves at Ellora were created on a trade route heading from nearby Paitan to Ujjain in central India. The Buddhist caves at Ellora were made in the 7th century. These are the largest Buddhist excavations to be carried out in India. They also reflect developments in iconography which had been taking place. From the simple ethical message of the original teachings, the doctrine had become much more complex. A graded path towards the truth had been evolved through deities who personified the attributes of wisdom and compassion of the Buddha. The last Buddhist Chaitya with a stupa to be excavated is Cave 10 at Ellora. The stupa has all but disappeared behind the figure of the Buddha, which has become much larger than it was at Ajanta in the 5th century. The traditional large window of the Chaitya hall has also undergone considerable change. It has lost its large size and grand simplicity to become smaller and more decorative. Meditation and worship was now conducted in the vast interior of the Buddhist viharas. The caves are larger and more elaborate than ever made before. Cave 12 has 3 vast stories, each larger than any Buddhist excavation at earlier caves at Ajanta. The rock-cut caves of India are one of the most magnificent traditions of the art of the world. In ancient times, palaces of kings and other buildings made in the service of ephemeral personalities were made of perishable materials like wood. That which was made for the eternal within us, to aid us in our journey towards self-realization, was carved out of the heart of the mountain. These caves mark the end of the great tradition of rock-cut temples in India. For 1,200 years, sanctuaries were hewn out of the rock. These took us far from the clamor and anxieties of the material world outside. Deep in the heart of the mountain, the devotee could meditate upon symbols and personifications of the finest qualities within each of us. The aim was to come out of oneself, with the realization of the grace that is in all of creation. The journey of Buddhist art has brought us to a point where the human form is used to convey ideas that transcend our mortal existence. The subject of the art is the depiction of the essence, and not only the optical reality of the world. As stated in the ancient treatise, the Chitra Sutra, the depiction of harmony and beauty has a transforming influence upon the viewer. When we respond to beauty, for that moment we come out of ourselves. Our worldly cares and concerns are left behind. In that moment, we are absorbed in the grace which is everywhere in creation.